Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CALLOUS Draft League Week 6 action. We've got the blue team on the left-hand side, Tratufo, Witchgender, Koala 44, all of whom, at various points over the season, have been on the channel before. And in fact, all members of the opposing team, the green team, have been here before during this CALLOUS Draft League. It is Damflame, Zokuru, and 48. On paper, this does not look like an even match. Zokuru and 48, probably the two overall best players on the green team against two of the, for lack of a better term, weaker players on the blue team in Witchgender and Koala. But unfortunately for blue, green doesn't really care. Green is basically locked for playoffs. Blue is not. They're fighting for a spot, and they have a shot, but they are going to really have to earn it given the way these matchups fell and given these opponents. Now, they're not supposed to win on paper, and if green wants to knock blue out of playoffs, they can certainly take a big step towards doing that in cleaning up these matchups that they're supposed to win here. However, the flip side of that, if you do manage to win as Witchgender and Koala, that is a fantastic story and a fantastic confidence boost going into the playoffs. I mean, you will 100% not only feel like you earned it, but feel like you could beat anybody if you manage to pull this off. So it's going to be a tall task in front of them, but this is their season on the line. So here we go, blue team. We need your best draft and your best play. What will you deliver? They will begin the deliverance with Celebi and Titar deviating from the norm. Kind of, not too far. Basically anything other than Tar and Meta is cool with me. Celebi Tar I'm super duper open to. Is Celebi better than Metagross in this? I don't know. It could be. They function so differently that it's really hard to compare the pokes. They have like almost nothing alike other than they both happen to be psychic, but it doesn't really matter. They function very differently, and you can get into the weeds, and I certainly don't have time in this video before work, but they really, I mean, breaking it down, they function so differently that I think it's really hard to compare. It really is apples and oranges. So I'm okay either way. I don't think the placement matters here either because it's so early and opponent can just counter how they want to counter regardless. So obviously Meta's going to get picked on the other side, no doubt, just a matter of where you put it. And then the question becomes, what do you do with the other picks? And here's the answer. Going to be Snorlax, Skarmory, and Metagross. Okay, so just a review of how this works. So it's Snorlax into We Don't Know Yet for Tratufo, Skarmory into Celebi, and then Metagross into Titar. Left against left, middle against middle, right against right. So, you guys already know how I feel about Lax. I don't like it this early. I don't think it's as good in this format. I'm the only one on the planet who thinks that. So, going with a consensus, Lax being a round one pick here. Damflame is going to take it into an unknown rather than into Celebi, which is bad, or into Titar, which is bad. So if you're going to take Lax here, I wouldn't, but most people would. Then I think you take it into the unknown opponent. Fair enough. Zokuru, of course, the Stall Lord. Going to take Skarm basically anyway, but it happens to be pretty decent against most Celebis. It could be like CM HP Fire, it could baton pass to Magneton, whatever. But generally speaking, Skarm gets the better end of that matchup. Meta into Tar, fair enough. Both threaten each other. Obviously, Meta doesn't want to come into T-Wave, Fire Blast, Flamethrower, Dragon Dance boosted Earthquakes, what have you. But generally, if they start on equal standing, Metagross wins the 1v1, and you're obviously never not taking Metagross here. So 48 is going to scoop that up in what I would assume, given what was taken on the other side, is the most logical overall position. So Tratufo with the wheel pick is going to go Zapdos plus Gengar. Hard to argue with that. I guess one argument you could make is that Zapdos into Lax is meh. You're never really going to punch through it. I could see, I mean, the problem is a lot of the other good things that you would take here are also kind of meh into Lax. For example, if you took Starmie here, which is a Pokemon that I rate very highly, is that great into Lax? Same thing, if you take Regice or Blissey here, two really good pokes, is that good into Lax? So it's hard to say. The Gengar pick, totally fine. Forces the Lax to either get a Pursuit user on the team or to run Shadow Ball. And then obviously you can threaten it with Will-O-Wisp and the like. I wonder if you can go like Gengar Arrow here. Those pokes generally are kind of weird on a team together, but I mean, this isn't OU, so team building rules obviously very different, and you can probably make it work. I don't hate these picks. Zapdos can at least baton pass away from Lax. Hell, if Lax comes into it and you baton pass out immediately, you can even use that to your advantage and go to a fighter, go to something that threatens it. So these picks are fine. I don't know, like I said, that he's like setting himself up to be amazing against Lax, but it's way too early. He could just complement it later on with dedicated Lax hate in whatever form that ends up being. Fighters, Leech Seed users, Weezing, Armaldo, Sableye. There's a lot of counters for it, but so far, doesn't have those. Swinging it back to the green team on the right-hand side, they're going to do the following. Aerodactyl, Milotic, and Swampert. Am I getting the order of those right? Yeah, I guess so. Interesting. I would have thought that the Aerodactyl would have been against the Zapdos and the Gengar. It seems best to me there. Or maybe against the Celebi. It seems good there as well. T-Tar seems like the weirdest thing to put it against. Not that it's bad necessarily against T-Tar. It just seems a lot better against the others. Zapdos, Gengar, and Celebi are all very vulnerable to Aerodactyl. So I feel like if they were going to make that pick, they would make it in a different position. Same thing. Milo into Celebi is kind of weird. Celebi basically universally wins that matchup, but Zokuru is so confident in his own ability. Arrogant Frenchman, oui oui. He's got to just think that he's the better player and just wants to build a team that he likes and that he's comfortable with and doesn't really care what his opponent's doing. So this pick would certainly be in line with that thought process, taking it into Celebi. Swampert here, see, it feels so backwards to me. I feel like the Swampert and the Aerodactyl should have switched positions here. I feel like the Swampert is better against the Tar, and the Arrow is better against the Zapdos and the Gengar. So, while these are obviously good Pokemon, I would have just swapped the spots, because very easily the Zapdos or the Gengar could both carry things, whether it's just directly a Grass attack, or whether it's as simple as Toxic Zapdos, Will-O-Wisp Gengar, or whatever the case may be. It's very easy for these two Pokemon to carry things to really hose that Swampert without effing up their entire set. And you obviously want a bulky water against T-Tar. So to me, I would have swapped the order here. I would have gone Aerodactyl into the Zapdos and the Gengar, and I would have gone with the Swampert into the T-Tar. I feel like those are out of place, but this is what they did. So, rounding out the round is as follows. So Starmie for Koala, which is obviously a really, really strong one too. And then Salamence getting added for Witchgender, which, ooh, I think just about the two worst things that Salamence could be against might be Skarmory and Milotic. And even more so together, because it's like, alright, you know what? I want to beat Skarm. I don't care about the rest. I'm just going to go with Special Ments or Mixed Ments. Well, guess what? That gets totally blocked by Milotic. And same thing on the flip side. You know what? I'm going to try to punch through the Milotic with CB Ments. That's great. You're not getting anywhere through Skarm. Ments is an okay mon. More than an okay mon. A good mon. A fine mon. But man, taking Ments into Skarmory and Milotic, I can't say that I get on board with that. I feel that this is a trap that people fall into a lot of the time. They're just looking at the board and they go, okay, what's the strongest thing? What's the scariest thing? And they just grab it and they just aren't considering enough what their opponent has. But yeah, I don't even think I would pick Ments into Milotic, but Ments into Milotic and Skarm, that really scares the crap out of me. I feel like already in order to salvage this from Witchgender's end, she kind of needs to take Magneton here and build like a mixed offense or a balance or whatever, kind of like you would see in OU. But man, I think the placement here is funky again. Don't you go Starmie against Skarmory rather than doing it the way that you did it? And that also frees the Ments from this matchup? Like, what if you just swap the positions? What if you just go T-Tar Salamence, and then you go Celebi Starmie into this. That seems so much better. But yeah, this is the way that they did it, and I don't agree with where they put their Mons here, so just gonna call it as I see it. I think it's a little bit sloppy, honestly, in this backswing for both teams, but it leads to a unique draft, and we'll see how it plays out from here. So beginning the next round of picks, they're gonna go with Double R, Regice, and Raikou, respectively. Okay, so the Regice pick I obviously like. Zokuru values it very highly, just as I do. Of note, he had the option of going with Blissey there and opted to not take it. So he's going to go Regice into two things that are weak to ice. That just makes sense. He's going to need a special wall. Now he has one. The Regice pick, I agree with, seems straightforward enough. The Raikou into the Zapdos and the Gengar, another strong pick. Raikou generally wins the 1v1 against specials, and obviously both Zapdos and Gengar are special-based. So between the Lax and the Raikou, I already see the Zapdos and the Gengar having a difficult time getting through, and I feel like Damflame is an early advantage in this matchup. I wonder now what Tratufo follows up with to combat the Raikou. I can see taking Dugtrio when you have both the Zapdug synergy and the Boomgar into Dugtrio synergy. The issue with that, the trap with that, is that there's only one thing on the other side for Damflame that he's going to be against that actually cares about getting revenge killed or trapped by Dugtrio, which is the Raikou. So if you're to make that pick as Tratufo, Damflame could tailor the rest of his draft to make the Dugtrio pretty garbaggio. So he might need to find a different way to deal with the Claydol, and I don't know what that's going to be. I could see taking Blissey here. Little suspect into Lax, but not the worst thing ever. You have to address the Raikou or it's just going to beat you. So, the triple pick going back to the blue team here. Koala, Witchgender, and Tratufo. They are going to do it like this. Fortress, Jolteon, and Registeel. There we go. Okay. Interesting placement that they've opted for Fori and Starmie on the same team. You now have two spinners into an opponent who doesn't have spikes, and presumably, given the way this is shaking out, is not going to have spikes. And that makes it even more questionable to me that they didn't opt to put the Starmie in the middle. Definitely would have swapped the Mence and the Starmie, even more so with how this has played out. The Jolteon is obviously a good pick into Scar Milotic. It's not going to crack Regice, but it can Baton Pass away from it. And with the clearly aggressive team that Witchgender is building, I can get down with this. I think she's still going to need like a Magneton, or I mean, honestly, maybe she ends up cutting the Mence, which would be a grand tragedy in life. It's also possible she's building something of a BP chain. It could be like CM BP Celebi and try to crack through that way, though I still don't like Mence's chance, even with a Calm Mind boost against a Milotic. I think you still generally lose. But I like the Jolteon pick here. I think it makes plenty of sense, and she could follow that up. I think Spikes would be really good on this team. Like I said, Magneton a consideration later. You can maybe Baton Pass with either of these Mons into something like a Hariyama or a Metacham that can threaten all of this thus far. So I could see where Witchgender can take this, but I still don't know that I love her end of the matchup at this time. And then Tratufo here, like I said, gonna need a way to deal with the Raikou. Registeel, I think, is a great pick because in theory it should beat both the Lax and the Raikou. Now, obviously, the Lax could go Curse EQ, but remember, it also has to have Shadow Ball for the Gengar unless Damflame picks up a Pursuit user, and ultimately you can't have everything. So I think Registeel is a step in the right direction and is pretty good against what Damflame currently has. So, 48, gotta be really smirking here. What an incredible wheel. Very late for both of these Pokemon, in my opinion. Going to go Blissey and Hariyama. Super duper strong at this stage of the draft. 48's got to love his team. It seems very strong to me. Probably the overall best start, in my opinion. Blissey just a necessary evil. It doesn't do anything special against this team, though of note it does shut off the offensive Starmie. So there's that. But Hariyama is a pick that I feel very, very strongly about into Tyranitar. I think it's one of the very best and safest ways to deal with it, and a pick that should be made very often, and indeed later than I think it should be, because I think I rate Yama higher than most people do. It is going to be Yama into T-Tar, which I think is a huge pickup, and I think 48's team looks very, very good in the early goings of this draft. So, we bounce it back to the blue team on the left, and this is what they're going to do. They're going to go with Heracross, Breloom, and Slowbro. Okay. Well, let's start with the Heracross here. This is as simple as taking a fighter into the Snorlax. I don't think there's anything more to the pick than that. Heracross usually wins the 1v1 against Swampert. And then Heracross and Raikou, weird matchup. Raikou probably wins, not that it wants to take certain attacks from Heracross, keeping in mind that Heracross, if it needs to, does in fact learn Earthquake. But ignoring the Raikou for a minute, Heracross seems like a reasonable pick in the matchup. He does have tools, double T-Wave user, Boom user, Will-O-Wisp user, whatever, to potentially support the Heracross. And we know that that matchup is not going to have Sand. So if he's trying to go down the reversal rabbit hole, perhaps that's something he could do. I don't mind the Heracross pickup at all. Seems like a fine pick. Breloom, sure. One of those kind of fighters that we talked about. I suggested Medicham, but Breloom is fine. It might even be better here because you have two ways to baton pass to it, so you can very safely get it in to get guaranteed spores off against things that you know you're faster than. And then obviously the threat of a focus punch here. Currently something Zokuru doesn't have a fantastic answer for, but I'm sure he will address that down the line. Slowbro here is interesting. A lot of people would rate other bulky waters. Vaporeon immediately comes to mind as a superior option, but in this case it might not be. The Slowbro is actually really interesting here. Slowbro is obviously going to fare a lot better against Hariyama than the Vaporeon would. And then you also have a lot of mixed options that Vaporeon wouldn't have. For example, Slowbro could go with like T-Wave against Metagross or Arrow. It could also have Flamethrower against Metagross. It can have Focus Punch against Blissey, which Vaporeon can't have. So I actually kind of like the Slowbro here. The one thing that makes it awkward is it is the exact same dual typing as Starmie and Slowbro. They're the exact same water psychic dual typing. Normally, that doesn't super matter. I mean, they really do function very differently, but it obviously means that they're going to have some redundant weaknesses, so it's kind of weird to have them together. But, like, for example, the team now has 3 bug weaknesses, but there's really not that many good bug attackers, so in theory, that shouldn't matter. We'll see if it comes back to bite him. There's also 3 grass weaknesses, which I think is a little bit more exploitable if 48 opts to pick up, like, a Sceptile or something to that effect. But I do like the Slowbro pick on principle. I think he's just going to have to be careful and really watch the potential overload of grass weaknesses here. And then finally, Damflame and Zokuru rounding us out here are going to do the following. Wheezing, which is largely for his own protection and also against the Heracross, so I think that's a great pick. And then my man, the Dragonite. So like I said, the Wheezing is very wise here because as the Lax drafter, you don't want to play against that, and now your opponent picked off the Heracross. So that is maybe one reason, if you have the foresight, to maybe criticize the Hera pick because it really, really invites this Wheezing. You may or may not give your opponent credit for actually taking it, though I do think that Zokuru or 48 are probably largely running this draft on Damflame's behalf. But they did not miss the opportunity. They were given one opportunity to take it. Who knows if it would have gotten grabbed had it gone back. But given the one chance, it did in fact get grabbed. And I think Wheezing is a pretty obvious and very strong. I think it is the absolutely 100% correct pick here. Cannot imagine what I would take other than Wheezing that I would like better in this spot. And Dragonite, you guys know that I always, always, always like. Of note, second rock weakness. Both Mence and Breloom could have Rock Slide, so I guess that's a thing. But I'm a big Mence fan, or Dragonite fan, rather. And I think it's always a good pickup. So Zokuru is going to grab that guy, and I'm sure he'll figure out a way to make it as useful as possible. Swinging it back around as we enter our third round of picks. It's going to be now Claydol and Gyarados. Claydol makes sense to me. Ultimately against Skarm, you're going to want a spinner. Not to harp on it too much. Still think he should have that Starmie from earlier. Still don't like that pick. But given where we are now, Claydol makes sense. Gives him a rock resist. Breloom doesn't really count, so I think he needed that. And by he, I mean she. I'm sorry, Witchgender is female. Just kind of talking mindlessly. Witchgender, female. She needed Claydol, needed a rock resist. And then also needed a rapid spinner, which obviously that's going to provide. I still just don't really like Claydol in general. it kind of sort of beats Skarm on paper, but like not really. You don't actually damage it. You're very passive. A lot of the time, if you just sit there and spin and refresh or whatever, you're just letting an injured Skarmory lefties up. So like I don't really think that Claydol is actually that great against Skarmory, which is probably a controversial take, but I'm usually totally fine if I'm the Skarm player and my opponent's answer is Claydol. I don't feel threatened by that at all. I feel like my Skarm's going to live a long time. But that being said, I do support the pick because, like I said, she needed a rock resist and needed a spinner, and Claydol obviously is going to provide both, and I think it's better in this case than Damflame would be if she is specifically looking for a rock resisting rapid spinner. So Gyarados here into 48. Gyarados is a mon that I'm very, very fond of. One thing that I'm not fond of here is adding a third electric weakness when there isn't, never mind an immunity, never even a resistance on this team. There's really nothing right now that switches into Thunderbolt. Now, granted, the good electrics that have stab on Thunderbolt, Zapdos, Jolteon, Raikou, are all off the board, so maybe it's not the most exploitable thing, but it's easy enough to splash Thunderbolt on other things. CM Blissey, very possible in this matchup, though it doesn't necessarily beat a physical tar. But I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere here 48 grabs something that learns Thunderbolt and is remotely decent at it and tried to punish the triple electric weakness that Koala has assembled. Nevertheless, Gyara clearly one of the strongest Pokemon remaining, and again, it's another T-Wave threat. That is his fourth potential T-Wave user, and I think against a team with Metagross and Aerodactyl, that is super duper where you want to be, though you do need to be careful about accidentally clicking Wave against a Gutsmon like Yama. So, over to the green team. This is going to be their follow-up. They're going to go with Umbreon, Porygon 2, and as we discussed, it's Sceptile. So the Umbreon, I think, is just a pick into the Gengar. I don't think there's anything too much more than that. I personally would have preferred Houndoom here, I think, because it's the same threat against the Gengar, but it's also a threat against the Registeel and the Heracross, whereas Umbreon doesn't do anything to either of those pokes. So I think right idea, wrong application. I also don't think he necessarily needs a special wall because he already has the Lax. So to me, Houndoom the superior pick there, though of course Umbreon gets Wish and Houndoom does not. But the ability to threaten the Registeel and the Heracross, two additional pokes, and honestly threaten the Zapdos as well, the ability to actually threaten this entire team, whereas Umbreon basically only threatens the Gengar, to me is enough to get me to go the other way. So I don't hate the Umbreon pick, but if it were me, I would rather it be Houndoom in that spot. And then Zokuru is going to pick up Porygon 2, seems logical here. It's going to be tracing Levitate against Claydol, which blanks the EQs, and it will also be tracing Volt Absorb into Jolteon. Generally speaking, for me to pick Porygon 2, there is either a Dugtrio or there are two very noteworthy trace targets on the other side, two or more, of course, and this is going to be applicable there. So Jolteon and Claydol, wonderful things to trace, and then you have the added bonus you could potentially trace against the Celebi as well. If you happen to get your Porygon 2 hit with Toxic or T-Wave or whatever, you could potentially Natural Cure that away without having to actually bring a Heal Bell user, though he does have access to one in Dragonite if he wants. Sceptile, hey, we talked about that guy. There are sets that threaten the entire team. For example, Leaf Blade, Thunder Punch, Hidden Power Fire hits literally every single one of these pokes. That is very much something that Koala is going to want to address. Perhaps that is part of the reason, still don't necessarily agree with it, why Damflame took Umbreon here rather than Houndoom, because they might be trying to choke out the special wall options from the other team, and Koala very much is going to have to find a special wall here because that Sceptile as it sits is a problem. So Tratufo with the wheel, taking us back to Gen 1 with the double starter here. Going to go with Charizard and Venusaur. Two good mons, obviously. Looking at the specific matchup, Charizard seems reasonable. It's going to have to carry Focus Punch in this matchup or it won't break the Lax or the Umbreon. So probably looking at the classic sub Focus Punch Fire attack. Usually it's Hidden Power, and it probably will be here as well just because the Swampert might just be HP Grass. It doesn't beat the Raikou, but it's pretty damn threatening against the rest of this stuff. So I think Zard is a good pickup. And then I like the Venusaur as well. You definitely want Leech Seeders against Lax, which obviously that provides. Grass Pokemon against Swampert, this is good. And then Grass Pokemon against Raikou, not like the be-all, end-all check, but anything that can come in on Thunderbolt, much appreciated. He could certainly use a little bit more Raikou help, so I think both of these picks are logical, and I don't have any issue with either of them. Bringing it back, Ludicolo, perhaps really trying to go down this grass weakness rabbit hole and exploit the opponent. Arcanine and Regirock. So Ludicolo is double duty here. Like I said, not only going after the multiple grass weaknesses on the other side, but furthermore taking out another Pokemon that can function as a special wall and depriving that option from Koala. Don't know what Koala is going to pick up at this point as a functional special wall. Articuno maybe, really, really sketchy into Metagross, Aerodactyl, Hariyama. As much as I love Articuno, I don't think this is a great matchup for it. And with that in mind, that kind of limits the options. I don't know if we're looking at Hypno or something to that effect, but the good special walls are few and far between, and I think Koala, for as reasonably good as his start was, is staring down a very good team on the other side and staring down a Sceptile that he really doesn't have a good answer for, and there just aren't that many good answers left for. Zokuru taking Arcanine, a Pokemon that I'm very fond of. In this matchup, I could take it or leave it. It does intimidate the Breloom, but it still wouldn't be happy to come in on a Sky Uppercut, let alone a Focus Punch. Arcanine probably does win the 1v1 a lot of the time against Jolteon, so there's that. Obviously not great against Claydol. Obviously not great against Mance. I guess it depends on what kind of Mance. It's actually quite good against a mixed Mance, but we already know that the mixed Mance is going to lose to Milotic, so we don't really need an additional check for that. Against a physical Mance, sure, Intimidate matters, but you still don't love Earthquake. Even HP Flying would be a decent chunk. And then Arcanine is reasonable against Celebi. It might be taking this for the lack of something better to take in his mind. Arcanine is a poke that I rate pretty highly as in general. I think round 6, a fine place for it. It may or may not make the team. The rest of the stuff I think is pretty much on the squad, but Arcanine may or may not end up on the team, but it's a mon that I like, just generally speaking. Regirock, sure, multiple rock weaknesses over here. There is the one rock resist, of course, and Registeel, so I guess that's the one thorn in his side, but one thing about Tratufo's team is that he's not very good at absorbing status, and adding Regirock, who can have both rock attacks and T-Wave, I think is a big asset. Now, as I said with the Yama, sure, you could T-Wave the Heracross, have it specifically be Guts Heracross, and then regret your life choices, but even then, I mean, if it comes in a T-Wave, you're still faster than it. If you're really, truly worried about it, you could just boom on it. So I really don't think that's a big deal. And like I said, I think Tratufo, if he has one big weakness on his team, is that he really doesn't deal with status very well. And Regirock, I think, is a good pick. It also gives him a third boom option. It just seems like great glue that I think Damflame will absolutely play in any configuration. Rounding out the third round, Koala and Witchgender going to do the following. It's going to be Entei and my favorite Pokemon of all time, Miltank, the cow. So the Entei, I guess that is as simple as trying to scare off these grasses a little bit. I don't think it's enough. Ludicolo may or may not come, but Sceptile is definitely coming. Koala's going to have to make a couple more picks like this to remotely shore up that grass problem. But like I said, the overall special threat of Sceptile is very, very real. And that's before 48 potentially picks up a Kingdra or whatever other special threat in the back. But for now, you can only make one pick at a time. Entei trying to address the Sceptile issue. Don't hate it. Happens to hit the Metagross as well. Obviously not fantastic into Arrow, Blissey, Yama, whatever. Entei's not a perfect mon by any means, but you've got to do something about the Sceptile, and I guess this is a starting point. Miltank seems like a fine pick for Witchgender. Yet another Pokemon that can have T-Wave. Try to status Zoc down, take advantage of his slower team. Try to punch through with the Breloom or the Mence or what have you. It frees Celebi from having to be on Heal Bell duty, which is good because I think it has better things to do. The Thick Fat, very relevant here, and you've got Premier Ice Attacker Regice and good Fire Attacker Arcanine, which it's going to resist both of. And it's just a good Gloomon, and Zokuru has no fighters or whatever to blatantly take advantage of the Miltank. Wouldn't like it as much if you were picking Miltank into like Metacham or something, which is still available by the way, but that is not the case here. So yeah, good Gloomon late in the draft to where you can justify that and you're not blatantly leaving something on the table. I am down with the Miltank. So the fourth and final round here, we switch over to Zokuru here. And an interesting pick to be made, to be sure. He's going to grab Cloyster here. And Armaldo coming down for Damflame. Well, it doesn't seem very likely to me that both Cloyster and Skarm are going to be played. I guess this gives him the option to pick and choose. It also could just be a strictly defensive pick. I mean, if you're looking at Skarm and you're like, oh man, there's a Zapdos, there's a Gengar, those things all have electric attacks, oh, there's a Charizard that threatens me, that's true, but running Cloyster instead doesn't really change any of that. All that stuff threatens Cloyster too. So I'm going to assume that this is just a defensive pick. I'm going to assume it's just trying to cut the opponents off of good spikers and good spinners when Zokuru is probably content enough with his team as it is. And this might be a similar pick. This might be defensive for Damflame. He's going to not only pick up a rapid spinner, but he's also going to take away a lax counter. So I think these are two defense-minded picks coming from the green end, which if they think they have better teams, if they think they have better matchups as it stands, there's no reason not to make picks like this. So I can support it. So now we're going to get spicy. How about these picks, guys? How about Muck? And then also Kingdra and Omastar. Okay, so Muck, huh? Yeah, I mean, look, you have got to do what you've got to do against that damn Sceptile. It's actually good against the Hariyama as well, not only as a fighting resist, but one of the only things that has stupid sticky hold and can make it so knockoff is not a thing. There are multiple potential Earthquake users for 48, and also Metagross could just have Psychic or what have you, so I don't think Muck is perfect here, and Muck doesn't get picked the majority of the time for a reason, but I will say, if there were a kind of draft where you would want a Muck, if there were a justifiable reason to take a Muck, this is probably the kind of situation where you would want it. So I'm down, and like honestly, seriously, I think the Muck really might make the team. It might actually be okay in the matchup. I don't know what it does damage-wise to Metagross and Aerodactyl, which is probably the biggest problem with it. You're not exactly sludge bombing into Metagross, for example, but the Muck might have some merit here. I think it has a non-zero chance of actually getting played. And it's a super cool pick, regardless of whether it gets played or not. Awesome to see something like that. He hasn't gotten a lot of love in this, so good for Muck. Kingdra. Sure, I mean, it threatens a lot of this stuff. It doesn't break the Regice, but it does beat basically everything here that isn't Regice. So if Witchgender has a plan to either overload on the Regice and make it so it can't cover everything, or has some kind of surprise move to take it out, or whatever, the Kingdra could clean Zokuru up here. I think that's a fine pick. I think that Witchgender, in order to win this match, has to be very, very offensive, very, very aggressive, and she is building the team to function in that way. Ultimately, Regice can't stop everything, or can it? Sometimes it feels like it can. But if she can overload on that Mon, Kingdra could be a potent cleaner in the back. As far as Omastar, Omastar is the worst Pokemon ever. On to the next picks. 48 is going to round out his draft with Blastoise and also Dugtrio. So I guess I should note that Omastar, the worst Pokemon ever, does learn Spikes, so 48 is just going to take a spinner and be extra safe. Blastoise is a good Mon, probably underrated in this. It's so far down the depth chart because there are so many good bulky waters and you don't have to take Blastoise, but it's a really nice steal for a team that doesn't have a bulky water and just wants to round out the squad late. You need a water, you need a spinner, boom. Blastoise is your guy. Though I do note that Vaporeon is still undrafted in this, which is unusual, but regardless, needing the spinner here, Blastoise makes sense. Dugtrio, a reasonable pickup as well. Decent against Registeel, good against Heracross, okay against Venusaur. Omastar sucks, doesn't matter, everything beats Omastar, but I guess Dugtrio is good against that as well. Overall, good squad for 48, and I think that any of these 8 Mons, probably Ludicolo is the one that excites me the least, but truly, any of these 8 Mons could ultimately make the team. Swinging it back for the final triple pick for the blue team. They're going to do it like this. Poliwrath, another weird one. Alakazam, like that guy. And Crobat, don't like that guy. Okay, Poliwrath, sure, that's interesting. Adding another fighter here, a unique fighter. The fighter is obviously good against the Lax. The fighter is obviously good against the Umbreon. The fighter is obviously good against the Regirock, but some fighters are like, against Armaldo. I mean, after all, it does take fighting attacks neutrally, but this particular fighter has a water element as well that Armaldo wants no part of. And like I've discussed throughout the draft, Tratufo does have a number of support pieces, whether it is Will-O-Wisp, whether it is now Sleep Powder, whether it is T-Wave, and there is the potential to set up a Poliwrath belly drum sweep or something to that effect. That's actually a very scary and very real threat against Damflame. So it gives him an option in the builder. He could just play it straight, cut the Omastar, cut the Poliwrath, and just use the top 6, which is probably the most generic and solid team. But he now has the cheese option in the builder to build the whole team around enabling a belly drum Poliwrath sweep. And that threat is very, very real. Weezing, if it wasn't already carrying Haze, it definitely is now, and Damflame is probably going to have to make a tweak or two in the builder in order to really, really cover the potential of getting swept by the Poliwrath. Alakazam for Witchgender, same shit. It doesn't break the Regice, but the Regice can't beat everything, and especially if you tailor the set. CM Fire Punch, for example, comes to mind immediately. It might be the overload Regice game plan for Witchgender, and it might work, because none of this other stuff really functions even close to a special wall, especially in the context of this matchup. Like, if you view Milotic as kind of sort of a special wall, sure, but not against Jolteon, not against Celebi. So yeah, it's gonna be the overload Regice plan for Witchgender. I dig it. I think that might be her best bet. Just very, very aggressive. Regice can't beat everything. What if you just crit it? What if something bad happens to it? All of a sudden, Alakazam, Kingdra, Jolteon, all these Mons, they are very threatening against Zokuru. So I dig it. I like the Alakazam pick, and I think that has a very real chance to make the team. Crobat. Sure, I mean, again, desperately trying to address these grass Pokemon. It's also pretty good against Hariyama as well, with the double fighting resist. Not generally a Crobat fan, but I can see why it would be picked here. I don't see any harm in picking it here. Of note, Koala did not adequately address the electric issue, and in fact just added another electric weakness, which is my one biggest qualm with this pick. I would have liked to have seen something, even if you don't intend to run it, that's going to deal with electrics. I would have liked to have seen Steelix or something here to a little bit make your opponent think twice. But I think Blissey's going to have Thunderbolt. I think Sceptile's going to have Thunder Punch. I think even Ludicolo, if it comes, might have Thunder Punch. But I guess, to be fair, 48's team does not have many good things to actually use electric attacks, and that weakness is maybe not as egregious as it could have been. Finally, wrapping us up, it is going to be Espeon and Sableye. So Vaporeon goes undrafted. It feels like every single draft there's a Mon or two that really stands out in a world of Omastar and Poliwrath and Espeon and this other junk Muck Crobat. This other Junkzilla gets drafted, but Vaporeon and Moltres, interestingly, do not, which is very strange. But the Espeon here for Damflame, that actually seems like a pretty good threat into Tratufo, other than the Registeel, which is going to be working overtime. Doesn't actually have anything super close to a special wall. And he actually has multiple psychic weaknesses as well, more than you may realize. He's got 4 of them. The Gengar, the Heracross, the Venusaur, the Poliwrath all don't like it, so I think the Espeon very well might get played from Damflame. I think that was an awesome round 8 pickup. I think that was huge upside, huge value for a final pick for Damflame. And I don't really, I mean, Registeel, but again, Registeel can't cover everything, and just like CM, BP, 2 attacks seems very deadly for Espeon. Man, I think that's a great, great pick. I think there's a very, very high chance that he ultimately ends up playing that and that it's pretty good in the matchup. And then finally, Sableye is just a beloved Zokuru pocket pick. I don't know that I love it in this matchup. Zokuru has been very fond of that poke, and yeah, it could probably stop Claydol from rapid spinning. But I mean, honestly, if I'm Witchgender, I don't even know that I would bring the Claydol. It doesn't seem that exciting to me. I don't think she's going to win this game by rapid spinning or playing defensively or just like giving Zokuru time to lefties things up. I think the slower the game pace is, the more it favors Zokuru. I think if I'm Witchgender, I would probably cut the Claydol and just go as aggressive as possible. And I think cutting the Claydol actually makes the Porygon 2 and the Sableye a lot worse, and that kind of leaves Zokuru with some awkward stuff. Like, Porygon 2 is still okay, but it's worse without the Claydol there, and then Sableye and Cloyster would both be kind of meh. But like I said, I mean, it's weird to cut a spinner into somebody who blatantly is going to have at least a spiker between the Skarm and the Cloyster. But I just don't see Witchgender winning a long game. I don't see her against the team on the other side and against the player on the other side. I don't see her grinding him out given the way the matchup is falling. I think her best bet is to be very, very aggressive. I would cut the doll and I would go ham, and I think that's her best chance to win. But that is our draft, so let's just go over the matchups, make some predictions, and I will get on with my morning, feed the cats, and take a shower and go to work and all that riveting stuff that I do on most days. Well, I feed the cats every day, to be very clear, but don't go to work 7 days a week. Thank fuck. So, the A matchup, Tratufo and Damflame. This one's interesting. This one is back and forth. A decent amount of lax counterplay, but not world-beatingly so. The Gengar, the Registeel, a Leech Seed user, and multiple things that resist normal gives him some action against the lax. He didn't like hard counter it the way that we've seen happen to lax in other drafts, but certainly has some play against it. And some of the things like Heracross and Charizard that don't counter it per se obviously threaten it and are going to make it so there aren't that many free opportunities or good opportunities for Damflame with the lax. But the lax should actually be somewhat reasonable in this matchup. Whereas a lot of the time lax gets drafted and I look at it and I go, my god, this thing is going to be heinous. But let's see. Given the rest of the matchup, one thing that I don't really like about Damflame's team is that it's really slow overall. Lax, Swampert, Weezing, Umbreon, Regirock, Armaldo, those are all slow mons. Raikou and Espeon are obviously fast. Those are the exceptions. But 6 out of the 8 for Damflame, very much on the slow, clunky side. There's also like a little bit too much do-nothing, I think, for Damflame. I think like Umbreon, Armaldo, Weezing. I like Weezing a lot, just as in general. I thought it was a great pick at the time, and I'm a big Weezing fan, but I do think that Damflame's team as a whole is kind of passive, kind of do nothing. I think that the only real win conditions here, I mean, I guess they're really good win conditions. The Lax, the Raikou, and the Espeon are pretty real threats, actually. I mean, the Lax, like I said, to a lesser extent, I think Tratufo has some counterplay. I could see the Raikou threat being very real, though. I mean, it's just like the Registeel and to a lesser extent the Venusaur, and I very much wonder in this matchup if the Venusaur considers bringing Earthquake. But yeah, the Raikou was never super duper addressed, and then 3 of the 4 final picks for Tratufo, the Charizard, the Omastar, the Poliwrath are all electric weak, so there's that as well. And then the Espeon, I think, was a sneaky good pick for Damflame. Like I said, I think that could be a real threat. I look at the Registeel as an answer for like everything, but again, it just like the Reg Ice in the other matchup, it can't cover everything. Are we counting on Registeel against Lax and Raikou and Espeon? I don't know that it can hold all of that off. So I really don't know how to feel about this matchup. I'm back and forth. Like on one hand, Tratufo should control the tempo and has the definitely faster team, the definitely more aggressive team. I could definitely see matchups with Tratufo dominating the tempo and keeping Damflame on the back foot. And oh, what the fuck switches into Charizard? That's so dangerous. Or oh man, Heracross is already in. My Weezing's at 60%. What do I do? Stuff like that. But I can also see the Raikou or the Espeon getting going and Tratufo having a challenging time with those Pokemon as well. It's tough. I don't know what to do with this matchup. I can really see scenarios where either player snowballs out of control. Like if Charizard gets behind a sub, which I don't think is the most difficult thing to do in the matchup, that's just really bad for Damflame. He doesn't really have anything. But at the same time, if like Raikou or Espeon get behind a sub or start combining up, I don't think Tratufo really has anything for that either. So this is one of those really swingy matchups that has the potential to really be a stomp, really be a rickroll one direction or another, because they both have threats that the other one doesn't really have an answer for. Not sure how to feel about this matchup. I'm really torn, but gun to my head, I guess I will pick Tratufo, and that is with some bias player-wise, because I think he's a very experienced draft player. I've only played against him by proxy, so I don't really truly know the level to which he's super good or super not good or whatever in between, but I know he's got a lot of experience, and I know that people think that he's reasonably good, so I guess Tratufo, I will trust him with his draft experience to conjure up the right configuration here and get this one done, but like I said, I think this matchup can go either way, and I think it can be potentially even a real stomp one way or the other. In the middle, Witchgender against Zokuru. Look, I'll just get it out of the way that I'm going to predict Zokuru, but that is strictly based on the player and based on the experience. If these were exactly equal players, if it were totally neutral, or if the players were blind, I like Witchgender's draft better. If you were to ask me which draft, which configuration of Mons would I rather have, I would rather have Witchgender's. I'm going to be confident here in Zokuru's ability to both outbuild and outplay Witchgender, and I think Zokuru will perhaps get away with some of his imperfect drafting, which I very much feel is applicable to this draft. I think he will get away with some of his mistakes just by virtue of his playability against an opponent who I believe is a bit newer to the game. So I'm going to give Zokuru the nod with his ability to outbuild and outplay Witchgender, but I think that Witchgender had the superior draft and has the superior lineup, so if Witchgender is to consult with her teammates and get a couple reps in and really get comfortable with the team and really understand how the matchup is supposed to go and what her win conditions are and things to not do to really choke, I think she has more than a puncher's chance. I think that Zokuru being the superior player is his biggest asset, but I think that Witchgender has some very real threats that if she plays tightly and aggressively enough, Zokuru might have a hard time. Ultimately, I don't think Registeel can stop all of this if Witchgender has the right sets and just overloads it and has a bazillion HP fires or the similar moves to that effect. I think that the special attack from Witchgender, whether it is Celebi, Salamence, Jolteon, Kingdra, Alakazam, or all of the above plus Breloom, which is probably what I would do, might be able to overwhelm Zok. So, not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to predict Zokuru. That is with heavy, heavy consideration on the players. But if it were equal, I would definitely rather have Witchgender's 8 than Zokuru's. So I've got us at 1-1 right now with Tratufo and Zokuru, and that brings us to this final match of Koala and 48. 48 at first I thought had like the strongest draft going. I thought the first 4 for him were crazy good, and I thought the Sceptile was a big addition as well. Not as excited about the Ludicolo, the Blastoise, and the Dugtrio. Maybe other than the Ludicolo, the others were necessary evil. Need a spinner, got it. Bulky water, got it. Dugtrio, just like a little bit of Heracross insurance. And by Heracross, I mean you're playing against this team, so what the fuck am I talking about? I think I did it again. I think when I talked about the Dugtrio, I thought I was talking about. I totally did. I just realized that in hindsight. I think, yeah, man. I don't know why. It's like the second video that I've done this. I don't know why the ends play against each other. 48 is against Koala, not against Tratufo. I was totally talking about the Dugtrio against the Registeel, the Omastar, the Heracross. He's not against that. So oopsie daisy, but like I said, this video is like an hour long and near the end, so I'm obviously not going to go back and redo it, but finally caught myself at the end. Let's try this again. So the Dugtrio is actually against this squad. So it seems reasonable here. So it gives you even more against the T-Tar. I think he's already pretty damn good against T-Tar. With Meta, Aero, Hariyama, Sceptile, Blastoise, I don't think T-Tar is going to sweep him, but Dugtrio gives you even more. I don't think you need help against the Starmie either, because you have the Blissey and the Sceptile, but Dugtrio gives you even more. And then it also is going to get to the Entei and the Muck if he views those as problems for him. Don't know whether he's going to ultimately bring the Dugtrio or not. I'm not necessarily opposed to him bringing the Dugtrio, but it seems okay in the matchup. Anyway, now that we know who's actually against who, Koala against 48, let's take a look here. Like I said, the quad electric weakness that Koala ended up with is not like ridiculously exploited by 48 by any means. One thing that is a bit scary to me, and this has been there, this has been face up the whole time. Did Koala really never draft a rock resist against an opponent that has Aerodactyl? He managed to pick up 3 rock weaknesses with the Gyarados, the Entei, and the Crobat. But what about a rock resist? Huh? Huh? And it's weird too, because like things like Steelix, things like Donphan, things like Flygon. I mean, not that those are all perfect Aerodactyl counters by any means, but that stuff all went undrafted. Rock resist options were there. And he, I guess, felt like he didn't need them. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm not too sure about that. And I think really looking at that and realizing that, I think is really all that I need. I mean, I think the Sceptile is a real threat too, but I think the fact that there's an Aerodactyl on the other side and that there is not a single rock resistance, but a whole heck of a lot of things that don't switch well into Aerodactyl, I think that's kind of all that I need to see. I think Aerodactyl's going to be clicking Rock Slide for free very often, and Koala's going to have to get real creative. Like I said, he's got like 4 things that can learn T-Wave, and I think it should be a very real consideration that many of them, 3 of them, 4 of them, all do in fact bring T-Wave, because you're going to need something like that for the Aerodactyl, and even then that doesn't prevent the Blissey from just running Heal Bell or Aromatherapy if you're truly worried about that from 48 seat. And I think that the primary win conditions for Koala are things that can be neutralized on the other side as well. I don't see the T-Tar sweeping here. I don't see the Entei sweeping here, given the Dugtrio, the Blastoise, the Aerodactyl on the other side. Maybe the saving grace for Koala is the Gyarados, which I do think is a reasonable threat. But if you absolutely have to, you could EV the Metagross to always live +1 Earthquake, and then just boom on it, and then you have Aerodactyl to kind of sort of check it. And if you really needed to, you could even go with HP Electric on Blastoise. But I do think the Gyarados is a threat against 48, and that's probably the one biggest saving grace in the matchup if Koala is to win. That being said, 48, who I perceive to be a better player, and the fact that Aerodactyl is something that Koala has absolutely no answer and no switch in for, I'm going to go ahead and give the nod to 48. So my final predictions are Tratufo with a win, but Zokuru and 48 for the win as well. And the green team takes it 2-1 and makes it a hard road, but still an achievable, walkable road for blue team to make it into the playoffs. So, feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to make fun of me for once again not knowing who's against who, even though I invented the format. That's okay. That's criticism I can handle. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my predictions on the matchups? Are there picks that you would make differently? Are you as surprised as I am that Moltres and Vaporeon, but also things like Flygon, did not get drafted at all in this draft? Always happy to hear your thoughts. Until then, off to feed cats and shower and go to work. Oh joy. I will see you guys in the next video.